The summer heat shimmered off the asphalt as Jennifer pulled her pickup truck into the roadside barbecue joint. After 3 grueling tours as a combat nurse in active war zones, she'd seen enough trauma to last a lifetime. Now back home in rural Texas, she found peace in these solo road trips, stopping at small diners and meeting locals who had no idea about her past. The smell of smoked brisket and maplewood filled the air as she stepped out of her truck. Her military-trained situational awareness kicked in automatically as she noticed a group of leather-clad motorcycle riders lounging near the entrance. They weren't your typical weekend warriors. Something about their posture and the way they sized up newcomers spoke of trouble. Jennifer straightened her shoulders and walked past them, ignoring their whispered comments. Inside, the small restaurant was a slice of Americana, checkered tablecloths, vintage Coca-Cola signs, and the kind of hospitality that made these places special. The owner, a gray-haired woman everyone called Miss Betty, greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome, honey. First time here?" Miss Betty's eyes crinkled at the corners as she wiped her hands on her apron. "Yes, ma'am," Jennifer replied, settling onto a worn leather stool at the counter. "Heard your brisket's famous in these parts." As Miss Betty chatted about her secret recipe, the door chimed. The bikers had decided to come inside, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. Jennifer kept her focus on the menu, but her ears caught every movement, every whispered word. Years of working in field hospitals had taught her to stay alert while appearing relaxed. The group's leader, a tall man with a scraggly beard and faded tattoos, leaned against the counter uncomfortably close to Jennifer. Well, what's a pretty little thing like you doing out here all alone?" Jennifer took a slow sip of her water, her mind already mapping out potential scenarios. She'd dealt with far worse in war zones, but something about these men set off every warning bell in her head. Miss Betty's smile had faded, her hands nervously adjusting her apron as she watched the situation unfold. "Just passing through," Jennifer replied evenly, her voice carrying the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced real danger. She noticed how the other customers had gone quiet, the usual diner chatter replaced by tense silence. The biker laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Passing through? Nah, I think you should stick around. We could show you a real good time." His friend snickered, spreading out around the diner in a way that made Jennifer's combat instincts kick into high gear. Miss Betty tried to intervene. "Now listen here, you boys need to dash." "Stay out of this, old woman," one of the bikers snapped, causing Miss Betty to flinch. Jennifer's jaw tightened. She'd spent years protecting others in war zones, and she wasn't about to let these men intimidate an innocent restaurant owner. Standing slowly, she turned to face the group's leader. Her eyes, which had seen the worst of humanity but also its incredible resilience, met his with unwavering determination. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," she said quietly, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd made similar warnings in far deadlier situations. "Just turn around, get on your bikes, and find somewhere else to cause trouble." The leader's face darkened with anger, not used to being challenged, especially by a woman. He reached out to grab Jennifer's arm, but before his fingers could make contact, years of combat training took over. In one fluid motion, she deflected his grip and positioned herself between the bikers and Miss Betty. The other diners watched in stunned silence as the situation escalated. Jennifer stood her ground, her posture reflecting years of military discipline. She wasn't looking for a fight, but she wasn't about to back down either. The air in the diner grew thick with tension as the bikers realized this wasn't going to be the easy intimidation they'd planned. Miss Betty had managed to discreetly reach for her phone, but Jennifer knew local law enforcement would take at least 15 minutes to arrive. She'd have to handle this situation carefully, drawing on everything she'd learned about de-escalation in high-pressure scenarios. The next few moments would determine whether this story ended with peaceful resolution or something far more serious. The biker leader's face twisted into a snarl as he signaled to his companions. Jennifer's mind raced through her options, knowing that whatever happened next would forever change the quiet atmosphere of this roadside barbecue joint. The lessons she'd learned in combat zones were about to be tested in a very different kind of battlefield. Time seemed to slow down as Jennifer recalled her training officer's words, "The best fight is the one you never have to fight." She took a deep breath, her mind clear despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The diner had gone completely silent except for the quiet hum of the ceiling fans and the sizzle of meat on the grill. "Listen," Jennifer said, keeping her voice steady and controlled. "I can see your patches. 3rd Battalion, right?" She nodded toward the leader's vest, where a faded military patch was barely visible beneath the dirt and wear. The man's expression flickered with surprise, his aggressive stance faltering slightly. "What do you know about it?" "I treated your brothers in combat," Jennifer replied, her voice carrying the weight of countless battlefield memories. "Worked 3 tours in the field hospitals. I've put enough soldiers back together to know that none of us came home looking for more fights." The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Several of the bikers exchanged uncertain glances, their earlier bravado diminishing as they processed her words. The leader's face showed a complex mix of emotions, anger still present but now tempered with something else, perhaps recognition or respect. Miss Betty, still standing behind the counter, watched the exchange with her hand gripping her phone. The other customers remained frozen in their seats, witnesses to this unexpected confrontation between a combat nurse and a group of troubled veterans. One of the younger bikers in the back spoke up, his voice carrying a slight tremor. "Which hospitals? When?" Jennifer kept her eyes on the leader but answered clearly. "Started at the trauma unit in Kandahar, then moved to the forward surgical teams. Last tour was at the combat support hospital in Bagram." She paused, then added softly, "Lost too many good people out there." The tension in the room shifted, becoming something different, more complex. The leader took a small step back, his aggressive posture relaxing slightly. "You worked Kandahar in 2019? Jennifer nodded, recognizing the look in his eyes. She'd seen it countless times before, the mix of pain, memory, and the shared understanding that came from experiencing things most people couldn't imagine. "I had a buddy," he said, his voice rougher now. "Got hit bad in an ambush. They said the nurse in the trauma unit." He trailed off, emotion threatening to break through his tough exterior. "I remember," Jennifer said quietly. "He had a picture of his daughter in his wallet. Wouldn't let go of it even when we were working on him." The leader's face transformed, the manufactured toughness crumbling to reveal the wounded warrior beneath. He ran a hand over his face, trying to maintain composure. The other bikers watched their leader, their own aggressive stances softening as they witnessed this unexpected connection. Miss Betty, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, slowly lowered her phone. The other customers began to relax, though they remained captivated by the scene unfolding before them. The smell of burning meat from the grill finally broke through the tension. "Your brisket's burning, Miss Betty," Jennifer called out, not taking her eyes off the group. The older woman startled and rushed to the grill, grateful for something to do. The leader cleared his throat, clearly struggling with what to say next. We should go." He glanced at his companions, who nodded in agreement. The manufactured bravado had evaporated, replaced by something that looked a lot like shame. "Wait," Jennifer said, her nurse's instincts kicking in as she noticed the leader's slight limp and the way one of the younger bikers held his shoulder. "When's the last time any of you had a proper medical checkup?" The men exchanged uncomfortable looks, confirming what she suspected. Too many veterans, especially those struggling to readjust, avoided medical care. The system that was supposed to help them often felt like an impossible maze to navigate. "I know some people," Jennifer offered. "Good doctors who understand what we've been through. They can help with the paperwork, make sure you get the care you've earned." She reached for her bag, maintaining careful movements as she pulled out a small notebook. The leader watched her write down contact information, his earlier hostility completely transformed. The other bikers had gathered closer, their body language now expressing interest rather than threat. The youngest one, still holding his shoulder, looked particularly hopeful. Miss Betty returned with plates of fresh brisket, setting them on the counter. "On the house," she said firmly, her earlier fear replaced by understanding. "All of you, sit down and eat while it's hot." The simple act of sharing a meal began to bridge the gulf between them. As the bikers settled at the counter, their leather creaking against the vinyl seats, Jennifer noticed how young some of them really were beneath their tough exteriors. They were just boys who'd come home from war and found themselves unable to fit back into civilian life. The leader, who finally introduced himself as Mike, sat next to Jennifer, his food untouched as he stared at the contact information she'd given him. "Why would you help us?" he asked quietly. "After how we acted." Jennifer thought about all the soldiers she'd treated, how many of them had come home carrying invisible wounds that were just as serious as the physical ones. "Because we're all still fighting battles," she replied. "And sometimes the hardest ones happen right here at home." The diner gradually returned to its normal atmosphere, the regular customers resuming their conversations as they witnessed this unexpected transformation. Miss Betty moved between tables with fresh coffee, her smile genuine once again as she watched the former adversaries share a meal and exchange stories of their time in service. What had started as a potential confrontation had become something else entirely, a reminder that beneath the surface, many people carried hidden depths and untold stories. The afternoon sun continued to beat down outside, but inside the diner, a different kind of warmth had taken hold. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation at Miss Betty's barbecue joint deepened. The bikers, now more relaxed, began sharing stories from their service days. Jennifer listened intently, recognizing the therapeutic value of simply being heard. Her trained medical eye didn't miss the subtle signs of ongoing struggles, the slight tremors, the watchful eyes, the way some of them startled at sudden noises from the kitchen. Mike, the leader, pushed his empty plate aside and pulled out a worn photograph from his wallet. "This was my unit," he said quietly, spreading the creased image on the counter. Jennifer leaned in to look, noting the young, hopeful faces captured in the desert sun. Half of them didn't make it back. The other half. He trailed off, but Jennifer understood. The other half might have returned physically, but parts of them remained behind on those distant battlefields. The youngest biker, who'd introduced himself as Tommy, finally spoke up about his shoulder. "Got hit by an IED 3 years ago," he explained, rolling his shoulder with a grimace. "The docs patched me up, but it's never been quite right since." Jennifer's professional instincts took over. "May I?" she asked, waiting for his nod before gently examining his shoulder. Her experienced hands found the knots of scar tissue and tension. "You've got some serious muscle adhesions here. Have you tried physical therapy?" Tommy shook his head. "Can't afford it. The VA's backed up for months, and private care." He shrugged his good shoulder. Miss Betty, who had been quietly listening while wiping down tables, approached with fresh coffee. "My son works at the Veterans Center over in Springfield," she offered. "They've got some good programs, help with paperwork too. No charge." The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the diner's windows as more stories emerged. One biker had been a mechanic, keeping helicopters flying through impossible conditions. Another had worked in communications, carrying the burden of messages that sometimes brought joy, sometimes heartbreak. Each story revealed another layer of humanity beneath their rough exteriors. Jennifer shared some of her own experiences, carefully choosing moments that highlighted the resilience of the human spirit rather than the horrors of war. She told them about the soldier who'd learned to walk again through sheer determination, and the nurse who'd sung lullabies to wounded men in their darkest hours. "You know," Mike said thoughtfully, "we started this group to look after each other. Somehow along the way, we got lost in the anger instead." He looked around at his companions, his expression carrying the weight of responsibility. Maybe it's time we remembered what we're really about. The other bikers nodded in agreement. The transformation in their demeanor was remarkable, from threatening presences to vulnerable human beings sharing their truth. Miss Betty's diner had become a sanctuary of sorts, a safe space where masks could fall away and healing could begin. A truck driver at a nearby table, who'd been quietly observing everything, stood up and approached their group. "I served too," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Ain't easy coming back, is it? Sometimes feels like nobody understands." The conversation expanded, drawing in other customers who'd been silent witnesses to the afternoon's events. A retired teacher spoke about her son serving overseas. A young waitress shared that her sister was currently deployed. The diner became a microcosm of a community connected by the invisible threads of military service and its lasting impact. Jennifer watched as connections formed, phone numbers were exchanged, and support networks began to take shape. This was healing in its purest form, not through medicine or therapy, but through the simple power of understanding and shared experience. As the day began to wind down, Mike pulled Jennifer aside. "What you did today." He struggled to find the right words. "You could have called the cops, could have made things ugly. Instead, you saw past our BS and recognized what was really going on." "Sometimes the toughest exterior hides the deepest wounds," Jennifer replied, thinking of all the soldiers she'd treated who'd maintained their strength until the moment they were safely in medical care. "We all cope in different ways." Tommy approached them, his posture straighter despite his shoulder pain. "We've got a weekly meetup," he said hesitantly. "Nothing formal, just coffee and conversation. Maybe you could stop by sometime? Share some of those resources you mentioned?" The invitation carried more weight than its simple words suggested. It was an acknowledgement of trust earned, of bridges built where walls had stood before. Jennifer found herself nodding, understanding that sometimes the path to healing wasn't just about medical treatment, it was about community, connection, and the courage to be vulnerable. Miss Betty, who'd been quietly supporting this transformation throughout the afternoon, finally sat down at the counter with them. Her eyes were moist as she looked at the unlikely group gathered in her diner. "You know," she said, her voice warm with emotion, "I've owned this place for 30 years. Seen all kinds come through those doors. But I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like today." The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The bikers began gathering their things, their movements now lacking the aggressive energy they'd arrived with. Each of them thanked Miss Betty for the meal, their gratitude genuine and heartfelt. As they headed toward the door, Mike turned back to Jennifer. "You ever need anything at all, you've got friends now. We might be rough around the edges, but we look after our own." Jennifer watched them mount their motorcycles, the engines rumbling to life with a different kind of purpose than when they'd arrived. As they rode off into the sunset, she realized that sometimes the most meaningful victories weren't won on battlefields, but in small diners where understanding bridged the gaps between hearts hardened by war. A week had passed since the unexpected encounter at Miss Betty's barbecue joint. Jennifer found herself back on the road, this time purposefully heading to the veterans' coffee meetup she'd been invited to. The morning sun was gentle, and the autumn air carried the first hints of the coming change in seasons. She pulled into the parking lot of a small community center, immediately spotting the row of motorcycles parked outside. Their chrome sparkled in the sunlight, no longer appearing as threatening as they had that first day. As she stepped out of her truck, she noticed Tommy doing his shoulder exercises in the morning light, the same ones she'd shown him before leaving the diner. "You're actually doing them," she called out, pleased to see him taking his recovery seriously. Tommy turned, a genuine smile breaking across his face. "Every morning, just like you said. The pain's not as bad now." He demonstrated his improved range of motion, pride evident in his expression. Inside the community center, the scene was far different from what most people would expect from a gathering of tough-looking bikers. The smell of coffee filled the air, and several card tables had been set up with information packets about veteran services. Mike was helping an elderly veteran fill out paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose as he carefully explained each section. "Look who finally showed up," Mike called out, his gruff voice carrying warmth that hadn't been there during their first meeting. The other bikers turned to greet her, and Jennifer was struck by how different they appeared. Without the artificial swagger and attempted intimidation, their true selves shone through, wounded warriors working to find their path home. A new face caught her attention, a woman about her age sitting in the corner, wearing a leather vest similar to the others. "That's Rita," Tommy explained quietly. "Mike's sister. She served too, but doesn't talk about it much. Been trying to get her to come for months. She finally showed up today." Jennifer understood the significance. Female veterans often faced unique challenges, their service sometimes overlooked or misunderstood. She made her way over to Rita, recognizing the guarded expression she'd seen countless times in the mirror. "Coffee?" Jennifer offered, holding out a fresh cup. Rita accepted it with a slight nod, her eyes evaluating Jennifer with the careful assessment of someone used to staying on high alert. "Mike told me about what happened at the diner," Rita said after a moment. "Said you were a combat nurse." She paused, taking a sip of coffee. "I was a helicopter pilot. 3 tours." Jennifer settled into the chair next to her, not pushing for more information. Sometimes the most important thing was simply holding space for someone else's story to emerge in its own time. Around them, the meeting continued. A VA representative had set up a laptop and was helping veterans navigate the complex system of benefits and healthcare options. The bikers moved between tables, sharing their experiences and offering support to newer members of their growing community. Mike approached their corner, carrying a cardboard box. "Found these in storage," he said, setting it down carefully. Inside were dozens of handwritten letters, messages of thanks from families of soldiers they'd helped over the years. "Forgot we had them. Got so caught up in being tough guys, we lost sight of what the group was originally about." Jennifer picked up one of the letters, its paper worn soft with age. The words spoke of gratitude for escorts to medical appointments, support during difficult times, and the simple act of being there when someone needed help. These weren't the actions of troublemakers, they were the efforts of warriors who'd found a way to continue serving even after leaving the battlefield. "We're thinking of starting a new program," Tommy said, joining them with fresh coffee. "Sort of a buddy system for vets just getting home. Help them navigate the VA, find resources, maybe just have someone to talk to who understands." Rita spoke up, her voice quiet but firm. "I could help with that. Especially for the female vets. There's not enough support for them." The morning progressed, and Jennifer watched as more veterans filtered in. Some came on motorcycles, others in cars or on foot. Each person who walked through the door found acceptance, understanding, and practical help. The tough exterior of the biker group had become a shield of a different kind, protecting those who needed a safe space to heal. Miss Betty made an appearance around noon, carrying trays of her famous barbecue. "Thought you all might be hungry," she said, setting up the food on a side table. "My son's coming by later. Says he might have some job opportunities for anyone interested." As people gathered around the food, Jennifer noticed how the dynamics had shifted. The artificial barriers of rank and service branch had dissolved, replaced by a genuine sense of camaraderie. Even Rita had begun to open up, sharing stories with a young female veteran who'd arrived looking lost and uncertain. Mike pulled Jennifer aside, his expression serious. "Remember how you handled things that day at the diner? That's what we need more of. People who can see past the surface to what's really going on." He hesitated, then continued. "We're thinking of expanding these meetings. Maybe set up some formal counseling sessions, peer support groups. Would you be willing to help set that up?" The request touched something deep in Jennifer's heart. She'd joined the military to help people, to make a difference. That mission didn't have to end just because she was no longer in a war zone. "One condition," she replied, looking around at the growing gathering. "We keep it real. No more tough guy acts. Just veterans helping veterans." Mike's laugh was genuine. "Deal. Think we've all had enough of pretending to be something we're not." As the afternoon sun filled the community center with warm light, Jennifer watched the scene with a sense of wonder. What had started as a potentially dangerous confrontation at a barbecue joint had transformed into something powerful and healing. The bikers who tried to intimidate her were now planning support programs, their energy redirected toward helping others find their way home from the invisible wounds of war. Miss Betty, still serving up plates of barbecue, caught Jennifer's eye and smiled. Sometimes the most profound changes started in the most unexpected places, like a small-town diner where a combat nurse refused to back down, not with fists, but with understanding. 1 month after the coffee meetup, the community center had become a bustling hub of veteran activity. Jennifer arrived early one morning to find Mike and his crew setting up for their biggest event yet, a veteran resources fair. The sound of motorcycles rumbling in the parking lot had become a welcome signal of hope rather than intimidation. "You wouldn't believe who called last night," Mike said as he helped Jennifer arrange information pamphlets on a table. "Remember that truck driver from Miss Betty's? He's part of a national transportation network. Says they're looking to hire veterans, train them for free." The center was transformed. Where there had once been just a few card tables, now there were professional displays about healthcare services, job training programs, and mental health resources. Rita had taken charge of a special section dedicated to women veterans, her quiet strength drawing in those who might otherwise have stayed in the shadows. Tommy burst through the door, his excitement palpable. "The physical therapy clinic downtown wants to partner with us," he announced, his previously injured shoulder now moving smoothly as he gestured. "They're offering free initial assessments for any vet who comes through our program." Jennifer watched the scene unfold with a sense of pride. The angry, troubled group she'd encountered at the barbecue joint had found their true mission. Their leather vests now bore a new patch, "Veteran Supporting Veterans," alongside their military insignias. Miss Betty arrived with her signature barbecue, but this time she wasn't alone. Her son, the Veteran Center coordinator from Springfield, had brought a team of professional counselors. "These folks want to set up regular sessions here," he explained. "They say it's better to meet veterans where they're comfortable rather than in some sterile office." The morning's first visitors began to arrive, veterans of all ages, some with families, others alone and uncertain. The bikers, who once would have tried to intimidate strangers, now approached each person with genuine warmth and understanding. A young woman in a wrinkled uniform caught Jennifer's attention. She stood at the entrance, clutching her discharge papers, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Before Jennifer could move, Rita was already there, gently guiding her to a quiet corner. "Just got back last week," Rita explained later during a quiet moment. "Reminds me of myself when I first came home." Sometimes the hardest part is just walking through the door and admitting you need help. The event grew busier as the day progressed. Jennifer found herself moving between groups, her medical expertise and combat experience helping her bridge gaps between veterans and healthcare providers. She overheard Mike explaining to a skeptical older veteran, "Look, I used to think asking for help made me weak. Then I met someone who showed me that real strength is being honest about what you're going through." A commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of young veterans had arrived, led by the truck driver from Miss Betty's. Their military bearing was still evident, but so was their uncertainty about civilian life. "Heard about what you're doing here," the truck driver said, approaching Mike and Jennifer. "These boys just got back. Their unit, it was rough. They need people who understand." Without hesitation, the bikers sprang into action. Tommy led some toward the job training resources, while Rita introduced others to the counselors. Mike pulled out his phone, already coordinating with other veteran groups in the area to arrange housing assistance. Jennifer found herself sitting with one of the youngest veterans, who couldn't have been more than 22. His hands shook slightly as he filled out paperwork for medical benefits. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "Everything feels different now. It's like I'm still waiting for the next mission, but there isn't one." "Your next mission is right here," Jennifer replied gently. "Getting better, finding your path, maybe even helping others do the same. It's not the kind of mission they train you for, but it might be the most important one you'll ever have." The young man looked around the room, taking in the sight of veterans helping veterans, the easy camaraderie, the absence of judgment. For the first time since he'd arrived, his shoulders relaxed slightly. As afternoon approached, Miss Betty's barbecue once again worked its magic, bringing people together over shared meals and stories. The aroma of smoked meat mixed with the sound of conversations and occasional laughter, not the forced bravado of their first encounter, but genuine moments of connection. Mike gathered everyone's attention, standing on a chair to address the crowd. "Month ago, we were just a bunch of angry bikers taking out our pain on the world. Then we ran into a combat nurse who saw through our act." He paused, looking at Jennifer with respect. "She reminded us of who we really are, not just veterans, but brothers and sisters who still have a duty to each other." The room fell quiet as Mike continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-won wisdom. "To all the new folks here today, this is your home now. Doesn't matter when or where you served. Doesn't matter what you're struggling with. You're not alone anymore." Jennifer watched as his words landed, seeing heads nod and eyes grow moist. The transformation went beyond just Mike and his original group. It was spreading, creating a ripple effect of healing and hope. A hand touched her shoulder. It was Rita, her usual reserve softened by emotion. "You know, when Mike told me about what happened at the diner, I thought he was exaggerating. But now I get it. Sometimes it takes one person willing to stand their ground with compassion to change everything." The event continued into the evening, with no one seeming eager to leave. Plans were already being made for future gatherings, support groups, and outreach programs. The community center had become more than just a meeting place, it was a sanctuary where the invisible wounds of war could begin to heal. 3 months after the resource fair, the impact of their work had begun to ripple through the community in unexpected ways. Jennifer pulled into the expanded parking lot of Miss Betty's barbecue joint, now a regular meeting spot for veterans and their families. The once quiet diner had become a symbol of hope and transformation. Inside, the decor had evolved. Alongside the vintage Coca-Cola signs, walls now displayed military unit patches and photographs of veterans who'd found their way home through the program. Miss Betty had added a bulletin board near the entrance, covered with job postings, housing opportunities, and success stories. "There she is," Miss Betty called out warmly. "Our guardian angel in disguise." She was serving coffee to a group that included both familiar faces and newcomers. Mike sat at his usual spot at the counter, but instead of intimidating customers, he was helping a young veteran navigate the VA's website on a laptop. "Any word about the grant?" Jennifer asked, settling onto a stool beside him. They'd applied for funding to expand their support services, hoping to reach more veterans in neighboring counties. Mike's face broke into a broad smile. "Got the call this morning. We're approved." He pushed a stack of papers toward her. "They were impressed by how many veterans we've helped in just 3 months. Said our model of peer support combined with professional services is exactly what they've been looking for." Tommy burst through the door, the bell chiming with his excitement. He'd traded his leather vest for a polo shirt with a physical therapy clinic's logo, though his motorcycle boots remained. "Just finished my certification," he announced proudly. I'm officially a physical therapy assistant. Can you believe it? Jennifer remembered the angry young man with the injured shoulder she'd met that first day. Now he was helping other veterans recover from their physical wounds, his own experience making him uniquely qualified to understand their struggles. Rita arrived next, accompanied by the young female veteran they'd met at the resource fair. The change in the young woman was remarkable, her nervous energy replaced by quiet confidence. She'd recently started working as a peer counselor, using her own journey to help others find their way. Got something to show you, Rita said, pulling out her phone. She displayed a news article about their program, titled, From Intimidation to Inspiration, How a Group of Bikers Became Veterans' Angels. The story had gone viral in veteran communities across the country. The diner's lunch rush began, but it was different now. Veterans mixed easily with civilians, the artificial barriers between them dissolving over plates of Miss Betty's barbecue. The bikers' reputation had transformed so completely that local businesses now called them for help when they encountered veterans in crisis. A commotion outside drew their attention. A group of motorcycles pulled up, but these weren't their regular members. The riders dismounted, removing their helmets to reveal patches from a veteran group 2 states away. Heard about what you're doing here, their leader said as he entered. We've got guys struggling back home. Wanted to see how you made this work. Mike and Jennifer exchanged glances. What had started as a confrontation in a barbecue joint was spreading, becoming a model for veteran support across the country. They spent the afternoon sharing their experiences, explaining how they'd combined peer support with professional services, and most importantly, how they'd learned to see past the tough exteriors to the hurting humans beneath. Later, as the sun began to set, Jennifer found herself sitting with Miss Betty at a quiet table. The older woman was looking through a photo album she'd started, documenting the transformation of her diner and the veterans it had helped. You know, Miss Betty said softly, I've been serving food here for decades, but now I feel like I'm serving something more important, hope. She pointed to a photo of their first official meeting, where former adversaries had become allies in healing. The door chimed again, and a familiar face entered, the truck driver who'd witnessed their first encounter. He wasn't alone. Behind him came a steady stream of veterans, some in wheelchairs, others walking tall, all wearing small pins that identified them as part of the transportation company's veteran hiring program. Thought we'd stop by, he said, grinning at their surprised faces. The company's expanded the program. We're training veterans in every state now. All because of what started here. Jennifer watched as the diner filled with people whose lives had been touched by their program. Mike's sister Rita was teaching a young female veteran how to ride a motorcycle, part of their new therapy program. Tommy was demonstrating exercises to a group of veterans, his genuine care evident in every interaction. The atmosphere was charged with possibility. Veterans who'd once felt lost were finding purpose in helping others. The tough exterior of the biker group had become a symbol of protection rather than intimidation, their leather vests now representing a commitment to service of a different kind. As evening approached, Mike called for everyone's attention. Got some news, he announced. The VA's sending representatives next week. They want to study our program, maybe implement it nationwide. His voice carried both pride and humility. They say we're doing something special here. But we all know it started with one person willing to see past our anger to what we could become. All eyes turned to Jennifer, who felt her cheeks flush. I just reminded you of who you already were, she said quietly. Warriors who never stopped serving, just changed battlefields. Miss Betty brought out a special dessert, her famous peach cobbler. As she served it, she shared her own news. My son's veteran center in Springfield? They're expanding. Going to use our model, bikers and all. She paused, wiping her eyes. Who would have thought that one scary afternoon could lead to all this? The diner buzzed with conversation and laughter, plans and possibilities. The bulletin board by the door was now overflowing with success stories, veterans who'd found jobs, homes, and most importantly, hope. The motorcycle parking lot outside had become a symbol of transformation, each bike representing a warrior who'd found their way home through understanding and support. Jennifer looked around at the gathered faces, remembering that tense first encounter. The combat nurse in her had assessed the threat that day, but the human in her had seen the pain behind the posturing. Now, months later, that moment of insight had sparked a movement of healing that showed no signs of slowing down. 6 months after their first encounter, Jennifer stood before a packed auditorium at the National Veteran Support Conference. In the front row sat Mike, Rita, Tommy, and Miss Betty, along with dozens of other veterans whose lives had been transformed by their program. The journey from a tense confrontation at a barbecue joint to this moment seemed almost surreal. What we discovered, Jennifer began, her voice steady despite her nerves, was that sometimes the toughest exterior hides the deepest need for healing. We learned that veterans helping veterans isn't just a slogan, it's a powerful force for change. She glanced at Mike, who nodded encouragingly. The presentation screen behind her showed photos of their journey, the community center meetings, the motorcycle escorts to medical appointments, the support groups at Miss Betty's diner. Each image told a story of transformation and hope. But our biggest lesson, she continued, was that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in diners where bikers and nurses find common ground. It happens in parking lots where warriors learn to trust again. It happens when we stop seeing the stereotype and start seeing the person. After the presentation, veterans from across the country approached them, eager to learn how to replicate their success. Mike, once the leader of an intimidating biker gang, now spoke eloquently about peer support and trauma-informed care. His transformation was perhaps the most visible symbol of their program's success. Back at Miss Betty's that evening, they celebrated another milestone. The diner, now officially recognized as a veteran support center, had received funding to expand. The small building next door would become a dedicated space for counseling and support services, while the diner would remain the heart of their community. Remember that first day? Miss Betty asked, serving her famous barbecue to the gathered crowd. I was so scared I had my finger on the phone, ready to call the police. Now look at us, we're changing the whole system. Tommy, now a full-time physical therapy assistant, was training other veterans in his rehabilitation program. Got 10 more veterans signed up for PT certification, he announced proudly. The clinic can't believe how well veterans respond to being treated by one of their own. Rita had become a leader in her own right, focusing on the unique challenges faced by female veterans. Her quiet strength had created a safe space for women warriors to share their stories and find their path to healing. Got something to show you, she said, pulling Jennifer aside. She revealed architectural plans for a new women veteran center, designed specifically to address the needs they'd identified through their program. The VA's funding it based on our recommendations. The door chimed, and a group of VA officials entered, not for an inspection this time, but to learn. They'd been studying the program's success, amazed by the reduction in veteran homelessness and suicide rates in areas where the program operated. Your approach is revolutionary in its simplicity, one official commented, watching the natural interactions between veterans of different eras. You've created a model that combines professional care with peer support in a way we've never seen before. Mike, who'd once used his imposing presence to intimidate, now used it to welcome newcomers and put nervous veterans at ease. The key, he explained to the officials, is meeting veterans where they are, not where we think they should be. Sometimes that's in a diner. Sometimes it's in a parking lot. The important thing is showing them they're not alone. The truck driver who'd witnessed their first encounter had become a regular visitor, his transportation company now operating a nationwide network of veteran drivers helping other veterans relocate for jobs or medical care. We've got trucks running in 48 states now, he reported. Every driver trained to recognize when a fellow vet needs help. Jennifer watched as Miss Betty added new photos to the wall, images of success stories, of veterans finding their way home through understanding and support. The collection had grown so large she'd had to expand to a second wall. A young veteran, recently returned from overseas, sat quietly in a corner booth. Jennifer recognized the look in his eyes, the same mix of pain and uncertainty she'd seen in Mike and his group that first day. But now, instead of facing judgment or intimidation, he was surrounded by people who understood. Rita noticed him too and motioned to Jennifer. "Think it's time to show him the ropes?" she asked softly. Together, they approached his booth, not as authority figures, but as fellow warriors who'd walked the path he was beginning. "Rough day?" Jennifer asked, sliding into the booth while Rita pulled up a chair. The young veteran nodded, his hands wrapped tightly around his coffee cup. "Don't know where I fit anymore," he admitted, echoing words they'd heard so many times before. "Everything feels wrong?" Rita finished for him. "Like you're wearing civilian clothes but your mind's still in combat mode?" The relief on his face was immediate, the recognition that someone else understood. Mike appeared with a plate of Miss Betty's barbecue, setting it down with the quiet authority of someone who'd been there himself. "First thing you need to know," Mike said, his voice gentle despite his imposing appearance, "is that everyone in this diner has felt exactly what you're feeling. Second thing is, you don't have to figure it out alone anymore." As the evening progressed, Jennifer reflected on how far they'd come. The program had grown beyond their wildest expectations, but its heart remained the same: veterans helping veterans, one story, one meal, one moment of understanding at a time. The VA officials, impressed by what they'd witnessed, were already talking about implementing elements of the program nationwide. But Jennifer knew the real magic couldn't be captured in reports or protocols. It was in the way Mike's group had transformed their pain into purpose. It was in the way Miss Betty's diner had become a sanctuary of healing. It was in the simple power of being seen and understood. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in colors that reminded Jennifer of desert sunsets in combat zones. But now, those memories were tempered by new ones, of healing, of hope, of warriors finding their way home through the simple act of helping others do the same. 1 year to the day after that fateful encounter at Miss Betty's barbecue joint, the parking lot was filled with motorcycles from across the country. Veterans had ridden in from every state, drawn by the story of how a confrontation between angry bikers and a combat nurse had sparked a movement of healing and hope. The diner had been transformed for the occasion. The walls, now covered with hundreds of photographs and success stories, told a visual story of their journey. Miss Betty had outdone herself, preparing enough barbecue to feed the small army of veterans who'd gathered to celebrate. Jennifer stood at the entrance, watching as Mike directed traffic in the overflowing parking lot. His imposing figure, once used to intimidate, now represented safety and support to countless veterans. She remembered their first meeting, his attempted intimidation, her steady resolve, and the moment of recognition that had changed everything. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Tommy said, joining her at the door. He'd just finished teaching a physical therapy workshop for veteran volunteers. His own journey from an injured, angry young man to a certified healthcare professional had inspired many others to follow similar paths. Rita pulled up on her motorcycle, leading a group of female veterans who'd completed her motorcycle therapy program. The quiet pilot who'd once hesitated to share her story now ran one of the most successful women veteran support programs in the country. "Got something to show you," Rita said, embracing Jennifer. She pulled out a letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Their program was being adopted as a national model, with Rita's motorcycle therapy program specifically highlighted as an innovative approach to trauma recovery. Inside the diner, Miss Betty moved between tables with tears in her eyes, watching as veterans from different eras shared meals and stories. Her small barbecue joint had become sacred ground, a place where the invisible wounds of war could begin to heal over good food and understanding hearts. "Remember when we used to worry about troublemakers?" she asked Jennifer, gesturing to where Mike and his original group sat with their families. "Now look at them, they're the ones keeping the peace, showing others the way home." The truck driver who'd witnessed their first encounter had become a regular part of their extended family. His transportation network had grown into a nationwide support system, with veteran drivers helping others transition back to civilian life. "Just hit our 1,000th veteran transported," he announced proudly. Every one of them got more than just a ride, they got a brother or sister who understood what they were going through. As afternoon approached, Mike called for everyone's attention. The once intimidating biker had become an eloquent speaker, his rough exterior now housing a wisdom born of transformation. "A year ago," he began, his voice carrying across the crowded diner, "we were lost. Angry. Taking out our pain on the world because we didn't know what else to do with it." He paused, looking at Jennifer. "Then we met someone who saw through our act. Someone who showed us that real strength isn't about intimidation, it's about having the courage to help others heal." The gathered veterans nodded in understanding. Many of them had their own stories of how the program had changed their lives. Some had found jobs through their network, others had received medical care they desperately needed, and all had found a community that understood them. "But here's the real miracle," Mike continued. "It didn't stop with us. Every person we helped went on to help others. Every story of healing became a beacon of hope for someone else. We created something bigger than ourselves, a chain reaction of warriors helping warriors." Jennifer listened as others began to share their stories. A young veteran spoke about how Tommy's physical therapy program had given him back his mobility and his hope. A female veteran described how Rita's motorcycle group had helped her reclaim her confidence. Miss Betty wiped tears as they talked about how her diner had become a sanctuary for healing hearts. "You know what I love most about this place," an elderly Vietnam veteran said, his voice thick with emotion. "Nobody here asks if you're okay. They know you're not okay, and that's okay. They just make sure you're not alone while you figure it out." As the sun began to set, the parking lot transformed into an impromptu ceremony space. Hundreds of veterans stood together as Mike unveiled a simple plaque that would be mounted by the diner's entrance. It read, "Where healing begins, dedicated to all warriors finding their way home." Jennifer found herself surrounded by the original group, Mike, Tommy, Rita, and Miss Betty. They'd become more than friends or colleagues, they were family, bound together by their shared mission of healing. "Got something else to show you," Mike said, leading them to a row of motorcycles. Each bike bore a new patch, a medical cross intertwined with military symbols. "The combat nurse riders," he explained. "A new chapter dedicated to connecting veterans with medical care. Started by a group of veteran nurses inspired by your story." The evening air filled with the sound of conversations and laughter. Veterans who'd arrived alone found themselves surrounded by understanding hearts. Those who'd come seeking help discovered they had something to offer others. The cycle of healing continued, growing stronger with each new connection made. Miss Betty's barbecue joint had become more than a diner, it was a testament to the power of seeing past the surface to the hurting human beneath. The angry bikers who tried to intimidate a combat nurse had transformed into guardians of hope, their tough exterior now protecting those on the journey to healing. As the celebrations continued into the night, Jennifer stood in the doorway of the diner, watching the scene before her. The parking lot full of motorcycles no longer represented intimidation or threat, it was a symbol of warriors who'd found their way home and now helped others do the same. "You changed everything that day," Mike said quietly, joining her. "Not by fighting back, but by seeing who we could become." Jennifer smiled, remembering the tension of that first encounter. "No," she replied, "you changed everything by being brave enough to let your guard down and show others the way." Together, they watched as the next group of veterans arrived, uncertain and hurting, but ready to begin their journey. The cycle would continue, warriors helping warriors, healing hearts finding purpose in helping others heal, all because one afternoon, a combat nurse chose to see past the anger to the pain beneath. The story of Miss Betty's barbecue joint had become legend in veteran communities across the country. But its true power wasn't in the story itself, it was in the thousands of new stories being written every day, as veterans found their way home through understanding, support, and the simple power of being seen for who they really were.